You know it's in Hurricane Katrina. You have August 29, 2005, Gustav, August 29, 2008, Isaac, August 29, 2012, Harvey, August 29, 2017. These dates are not a coincidence. We are living in a new world. Things are not what it appears to be. Man is able to generate catastrophic events with weapons of mass destruction. Whether this is to reap profit by people sending donations to Red Cross who really don't give a fuck. You see what they did since Hurricane Katrina, so why would they care all of a sudden? People gotta stop being stupid, man. People just gotta stop being stupid and open y'all's eyes up. Not all of you, but those who, y'all, you know what I'm saying? Because I don't mean to offend anyone, but people gotta stop falling for the okie doke. Remember, let not your heart be troubled. But this is just further proof that if weather is fake, what can you really trust in this world? If they could create events like this, who knows what else strings is being pulled behind the scene or yet to come. And yet, all people want to do is argue back and forth over the YouTube when it's bigger than this. These Negroes think they doing something in their little room, going back and forth over the keyboard, having keyboard warfare, World War III over the internet. That's the game Negroes playing when this is the game that the unseen hand of the elite is playing.
Hey, welcome back everybody. On the previous video, we spoke about the U.S. Delta regions. We spoke about all of the cataclysms that's been in that area. If you haven't saw the previous video, please do so. If you notice on this map, these are what's called the U.S. Delta states or the Delta regions. I just want everybody to keep in mind that BP oil spill that took place in the Gulf of Mexico a couple of years back left the place on this map right here that's called a hypoxic zone. And all that is, in simple terms, is a big polluted area of oil and man-made pollutants that make the area a toxic or hazard. For those of you who don't know, the BP oil spill was intentional. It was done on purpose. It was also an act of war. You have to start looking at corporations as branches of military. If you look at where the hypoxic zone is on this map, you can see it's at the mouth of the Mississippi. It's at a very important part of the Gulf. This would be equivalent to the Fertile Crescent in Egypt, the mouth of the Nile. This is where the water is filtered and it enters into the United States from the Gulf and is filtered through the Mississippi and fed throughout the whole northern part of the United States. So these states are connected by a river system. These were ancient highways. When traffic came in through Louisiana, it was able to flow all the way up to Canada through these river systems. This allowed big time trade and economy just like we have today. But there's a war that's been going on and the people weren't aware of it. The war of corporations to control the geographics, to displace people and control land and resources. It's important for us to realize that these Delta regions, the role they play to the entire country. This would be the umbilical cord of the United States, where most of our water systems is fed from these systems, from these Delta areas. And it all starts in areas like Louisiana and Mississippi by the Gulf, and the Mississippi River is very important. This area is very sacred. Do your history about the Mardi Gras in Louisiana, and you can see the sacredness of these ports in different areas in that area. So history is just repeating itself. In the previous video, we talked about how there are a lot of targeted areas being hit with NASA weather manipulation weapons. So we don't have to get into that in this video. What I want to do is just show you a history of attacks that has taken place. So during the BP oil spill, the economy in the Gulf was hit harder than it has ever been hit in its history. Many people lost jobs who depended on the Gulf, which crushed the economy down there. And this is all warfare. These are attacks. Our government is very evil. They're very sneaky. Whether you agree with me or not that they're attacking their own citizens, one thing you can't agree on, if they would do it secretly. So keep that in mind and think about all of the evidence presented. Think about the fact that we didn't start naming hurricanes until I believe around the 60s. And that was the same time a lot of these space centers came on the scene. And the same time a lot of these so-called natural disasters started appearing the way we see them today. We all learned in school how hurricanes work. They form in the water, they get their momentum and strength from the water, and when they reach the land, they cause destruction. And they dissipate because they dissipate on land and they get their momentum in the water. So hurricanes do a lot of damage to coastal areas for the most part. And natural hurricanes come and go just like any other natural phenomenon. It comes and it runs its course and it goes. But what we see right now is totally different. It's a series of hurricanes that appear to be gaining momentum out of nowhere, out of thin air. And that can be explained because they are being created at these space centers and literally made out of thin air, just like we showed in the previous videos with these SLSs or space launch systems, which are really cloud makers. And this is one right here in the state of Alabama where I'm from. There's also some in Florida and other areas, and these are a chain of systems that's causing all of these hurricanes that the people are experiencing right now. These are not natural hurricanes at all. The same day this disaster was at its peak, NASA was running engine tests in the area. Why would the government be testing rocket engines during a time like this? It don't make sense. They was actually creating this weather with these systems, just like I went over in the previous video. But how long have they been doing this? You see, because we may be just becoming aware to it at our time, doesn't mean it just started happening. These weather attacks can be traced back to the 60s like I explained previously, but now I'm ready to show and prove, so let's get right into it. So to the left is a chronology of events that took place at the Stennis Space Center from the years of, I think, around 2000 up until now. And to the right is a timeline of natural disasters that have taken place in the Delta regions of the United States. This chronology of events is from NASA's website. You could just go to NASA's website, go to centers, put in Stennis, and go to the About History. And you can go to this chronology. You'll pull up all of the different tests that has been ran at the facility. It got the month and the year. And that's going to be very important because what we have to the right is a series of floods and so-called natural disasters that's taking place over the same time periods. And you'll be surprised that every time NASA was running these tests, that's when these disasters happen. During the climax of this Harvey storm, NASA was running so-called engine tests. You believe that your government is testing engines during a critical time like this? No, they're attacking its citizens. They're the ones seeding this weather. I proved that in the previous video. And what we're going to do is we're going to point out some times where sudden so-called natural disasters form and cause mayhem. We're going to point out those times. And we're also going to go to our Stennis chronological list of events and see if we can sync some of these testing times to some of the times these disasters happen. So over a 12-month period ending August 14, 2016, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Bergstrom Airport near Austin, Texas, had their wettest month on period, which was in August. And this was according to the Southeast Regional Climate Center. The 6-month period from March to August 2015 was record wet in parts of Oklahoma. Record wet. So let's keep this in mind, March to August 2015. These storms started in March, y'all, of 2015, and they continued on all the way up into April. But it broke records in between March to August. That was the record-breaking time. And now we're going to check our Stennis chronological list of events. And if you look to the left, it all add up. So you can see during the time of the height of the cataclysm in 2015 in Oklahoma and other parts of the Delta regions. You can see during this same time at Stennis, August 27, NASA completes the first developmental test series on the RS-25 engines that will power the new Space Launch System rocket The series concludes with the 5:35 second test on the A1 test stand at Stennis Space Center. So August 27, they made weather. I already went over what the RS-25 is in the previous video and how that engine is actually a cloud maker. And we can see when they ran this test, it was mayhem that took place during the same time. And I'm starting to see parallels because when you fast forward up until today, when the storm was at its worst, your government was running engine tests on rockets. Does that seem logical? No. You can see August 2015, NASA tops out structural steelwork on the B-2 test stand in preparation for testing the Space Launch System core stage. The stand's existing steel framework had to be strengthened and extended 100 feet higher to accommodate the larger SLS stage. So they was running these tests at maximum potential during this time, and we see that the floods broke records during the time frame of March to August, and that's exactly in the middle of when they was running these tests, and they was running these tests to their maximum. And you can see all the cataclysm it caused here on the right, lining up perfectly with the events that took place at Stennis during that time. So when they're doing these rocket tests, they're really attacking us with weather. And if you're still not convinced, we're going to look at some more. I want y'all to keep in mind what I mentioned, that we didn't start naming hurricanes until the 50s or 60s, around the time these space centers came to be. When you name something, you have a patent on it. These storms are man-made. They are given names by men. People know when the monsoon is going to take place in Asia, and they plan for it. Weather don't behave the way we see it behaving at this time. We're clearly under attack. They started those tests August 27 at Stennis, and over that time frame, all the way up until August 31 here, you can see as a result of those tests that they started running toward the end of August. They started at the 27, and they topped it out toward the end of August. And as you can see, the end of August on the right, on the 31st, 1 to 4 feet of water inundated much of Brownsville, Texas. Numerous vehicles and dozens of properties were flooded, and we're talking about weather just coming out of nowhere. Is it a coincidence that every time they run these tests, we get these type of flooding and cataclysms? Nature is not attacking us. The Most High is not attacking us. These people are playing God, and I'm proving it. And if you're still not convinced, we're going to look at yet some more. So now I think y'all get the point, and I think we're going to speed through these, and you could pretty much do this research on your own. But as you can see here to the left, November 2015, NASA was doing more engine tests, and you can see November 2015, more so-called natural disasters suddenly popping up in these targeted areas. Do the math, people. Is it just a coincidence that in March 2016, NASA tested the RS-25 engine for 500 seconds? And to the right, you can see in that same month, same year, there was top rainfall, flooding. This is not a coincidence that in March they ran more engine tests, and in the same month there were more so-called natural disasters. This April 2016 is not really a engine test. We did have flooding in Houston and other parts of Texas during the month of April 2016. And what was going on at Stennis at this time? They were celebrating. Maybe they celebrated by creating some clouds some kind of way, but it don't say for sure that they ran tests on this date when we look at the events list here. But I do find it very strange that the months are still adding up. So they weren't testing an engine here, but they were celebrating during the time a flood was going on. I do just find it bizarre that the time frames are adding up. That during the days of these cataclysms, there's some type of event going on at this space center that's in proximity to these areas. Back in April 2014, NASA and SpaceX merged. We already knew that they were always the same entity anyway, but they cut the ribbon ribbon and came to a partnership at Stennis. These two come together, they create a methane-fueled Raptor. And the word Raptor is very significant. I told you that the names they use for this stuff is a dead giveaway. I made a whole video on the rapture, and that's a Christian concept. Find that video, and that'll break down everything you need to know about this Raptor and how it relates to cosmology and the Great Mother. Also how it relates to the Christian rapture concept. Most of the names they use is dealing with mythology. So this raptor sits upon the E2 test stand, and here is a picture of what that is. You can see it's another cloud making device. They can see different kind of weather. They can make these clouds less dense or more dense to make the rain drop at a certain time when it's over a certain area. They can actually program this weather and have very good control over it, where it's going and how much water they want to hit. And now they're talking about Hurricane Irma, and just like Harvey, it's all dealing with mythology, because Harvey means battle worthy. Irma is a goddess of war. The mission to Mars is a mission to steer the masses right into World War III. There's a language being spoken right above your head, and there's more than one way you can interpret this reality. Some people hear the word NASA, they think of space and they look above their head. When I hear the word NASA, I think of deceivers, and I think of space around us that's being controlled by military men who are strategic and very evil. So when I was doing research, I came across this little article from onlyinyourstate.com, and it was a list of 8 Mississippi towns, or what they call ghost towns. Name of the article was "What You'll Discover in These 8 Deserted Mississippi Towns Is Truly Grim." So I'm not the only one that's been talking about this, but I don't know if the people who did this article know how deep the rabbit hole really goes. I read this article, and it talks about all of the areas that I mentioned in Mississippi. But the important thing about this article is it gives an early history of how all of this stuff started. If you look here, by 1961, NASA acquired the area and the remaining 250 residents relocated. Just an article that talks about how these flourishing towns in Mississippi was all of a sudden made ghost towns. And it goes back to that buffer zone that I showed you previously in the first video, how they just ran these people away, how they still running them away today. So when I say NASA controls space, literally meaning land, all of these pictures you see, these towns don't exist anymore. It's all NASA, basically military land. And you can check this article out for yourself, and it'll show you starting from 1960s, all of these surrounding towns in Mississippi that was affected by Stennis. The first towns in the countdown mentions NASA. It shows you how NASA came in and ran the people out. You can see here in the early towns on the list how the land was obtained by NASA for the construction of Stennis Space Center. You see how NASA is written in the history of these towns. You can see how after the land was obtained, the buffer zone was created, the buffer zone that we spoke about in the previous video. But you got to keep in mind that how the land was obtained. The land was obtained by noise pollution, and I just recently came across this. So you can see it goes into the history of NASA on this land, even in '63. So you could go and check this out and see that there's a history of attack on these lands. The weather didn't come about until the space centers were set up. Noise pollution, running them away with the sound of rocket blasts. But there was no rockets, just loud speakers making the sound of rockets. And by the time we made it up to the 60s, after the buffer zone was created, Stennis was constructed, the weather machines were erected, and now the war is on. And it's been on ever since the 60s. Like I said, they didn't start naming storms and so-called natural disasters until the late 50s, 60s. So in May 1988 is when this space center was officially named the John C. Stennis Space Center in honor of Senator John C. Stennis for his steadfast leadership and staunch support of the nation's space program, which is really an evil military setup to take over land and space. So who was this evil man, John C. Stennis? Because they named this thing after him. Well, John C. Stennis was a racist Democrat senator, and he was open with his racism. He voted against every law that would end inequality, and he was a very evil man, a white supremacist, as most would call him, and he was all for the space program and running the people out of these targeted areas. He was a member of a very esteemed brotherhood fraternity, and many would argue that he was a high-ranking Freemason, just like so many other powerful men. So in a nutshell, that's who Stennis was. And you can do more research on him if you like. I was just looking into information surrounding NASA's experiments in the state of Mississippi, and I came across some more startling revelations. Just to summarize what this is, it just is chapter 15 of a book called Evolving Approaches to Understanding Natural Hazards. And basically, to sum all of this up, this was a book that was written by Graham A. Tobin, and in this book, he was talking about natural disasters and how to understand them. We always understood how to interact with nature, and even the animals know how to react to natural disasters. That's another red flag. I'm from the South. Prior to tornadoes and certain weather events, you can tell because the animals start acting strange. The animals start migrating to certain highlands or certain areas way before the weather comes. Any weather phenomena that catches even the animals off guard, who are very in tune with Mother Nature, then you know it's a red flag. It's probably man-made, and I'm just showing more information here to show you actual books that was written talking about natural disasters. And in chapter 15 of this book, it talks about NASA and these contracts. It speaks about the wetlands and how NASA has always been surveying these areas and the experiments that's been going on in these areas for quite some time, like I've been pointing out. And here's just more information to confirm that. But I don't think these authors who wrote these books during this time were aware that NASA had weather control capabilities. Again, these Saturn rockets was playing a significant role in the Apollo program. But this whole program was an act of war against the inhabitants of the Delta regions. And this big Saturn firing, which was supposed to be the future of Mississippi, ended up being its nightmare. February 27, 2008. And you might want to run that date across the list of chronological events at Stennis. You probably can find another match to that date. But anyway, February 2008, NASA's news chief Paul Foreman wrote this article, and it was called Stennis Selection Ushers South Mississippi into the Space Age. 10 years later, 2017, and Mississippi is definitely in the space age, as well as all of the areas mentioned. They were creating rhetoric around this space center. They were promoting as good, ushering Mississippi into the space age. And I told you what space is, so it's a smack in the face. They're laughing at us while attacking us. And the space program, like I said, these guys are stealing land from the people. If you read this article, it just goes into everything we went over about the Saturn rocket testing, and it's trying to explain to the people how this is a good thing, but the people weren't linking this stuff up at the time in 2008. I know I wasn't thinking about none of this at this time this article was written. They were saying that all of this stuff is so great, we're ushering you into the space age, and 10 years later, look at the weather phenomena that's going down. So they've been passing this off as a good thing. We got space centers here. And what they was telling the residents during that time was that, hey, you serving your country. You moving, going away from your homeland is helping us go into space. But it was really just helping them take space and create space for themselves and causing the mass migration and mass displacement of people. They were writing articles and creating dialogue, telling the people they're ushering them into the space age. But the people weren't smart enough to know that when they was testing these engines, so-called natural disasters was happening. And NASA has acquired so much land since then in Louisiana and surrounding areas, and they're constantly expanding it by flooding the people out of these lands, even all the way up until today, 10 years later, after this article was written by this NASA news chief. And what you're looking at here is the Stennis Space Center, Mississippi reverse mortgage lender. There was a lot of mortgage dialogue and mortgage talk that came about centering around NASA so-called compensating its victims. So this was started way back in the 60s. Now this was set up for retirees of Stennis Space Center, and they're now using this as their financial tool to retire. But this whole dialogue of this mortgage scam started to take place when they was displacing these people. They had a reason to create a dialogue around the displacement, and they using this game to displace us in other ways besides weather attacks. Reverse mortgages have been available in Stennis Space Center since '61. However, they didn't become well known and safe until the year '88. The home equity conversion mortgage became mainstream to Stennis residents soon after its introduction. Shortly after, U.S. Congress signed an FHA insurance program into law in '89. The HECM, also known as the Home Equity Conversion Mortgage, allows seniors living in Stennis Space Center, Mississippi to tap directly into their property's equity and establish either a credit line or receive a lump sum of cash. This is what the government did to us. Now y'all can research this further. I can be wrong. But there was definitely some mortgage scams and new laws that was created as a result of these disasters, just like there was new laws that was created as a result of the staged September 11 event. So from these self-inflicted disasters, they also tighten up the law on its citizens and take away laws from us by passing more laws. It's just really amazing that no one says, hey, why do these machines spend more time creating weather than launching rockets? I just want to say to everybody tuning in, I appreciate you. I think we pretty much get the point. I hope you know that your government don't mean you no good, and that they've been attacking their citizens ever since the conception of what we call government, which means to govern the mental. The fact that there's a group of men so-called governing our mentality as opposed to us governing it ourselves shows why the world is in the trouble that it is. We're not free mentally, and we're being attacked spiritually, physically. Stay tuned. Remember that Hurricane Irma is just another attack. These are not natural disasters, and the names of these disasters all relate to war. Knowledge is power, y'all. Share the video and let's wake up the masses. Remember, fear not. Peace and much love.